Hey, people, I'm Pai Huaita, and welcome to yet another Intellectual Tuesday. And today's topic is the one that no one asked for. People have asked me things now. Thank you, my precious subscribers. Pat, I will get to your things soon. This is one that nobody asked for, but it's one that I'm giving you. Pride Month is close enough. So we're going to talk about this one, and mainly because I've been wanting to talk about this topic for a really long time. Actually, since February of last year, I've been wanting to talk about this topic, but I've been hesitant to start. That being said, today we're casting aside whatever doubts I had, and we're just going to go for it here. So welcome to quote unquote homosexuality, quote unquote, in the ancient world. And we're doing this through the lens of Babur. Um, who in the world is Babur? I'm so glad you asked. Babur was the founder of the Mughal Empire. And now you're wondering, what in the world was the Mughal Empire? Well, the Mughal Empire was a Muslim empire that ruled over much of India from the year 1526 until 1827. So, a very long lasting empire, all things considered, especially in a place like India. So just about 300 years there, a little over. So that's pretty cool. Specifically in regards to Babur, though, again, that founder of the Mughal Empire, we're going to be talking about the Baburnama. This means something akin to like the history of Babur, the life of Babur, like memoirs of Babur. Babur, the name, and then Nama meaning yeah, I my old Turkic languages aren't that good. My bad. Anyways, Baburnama. What's interesting about this is it's one of the first ever autobiographies. Autobiographies in medieval India and really in the world weren't really a thing. So the Baburnama being published and whatnot is extremely interesting because it's kind of a trendsetter. And all everything in it aside, it's a pretty great view of medieval India. And I'd highly recommend reading that. But the Baburnama, written by Babur, it's an autobiography, and in there, Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire, an empire that would last 300 years, talked about how he fell in love with a boy. Uh, at the time that Babur fell in love with a boy, Babur was around 16, 17 years old. The boy he fell in love with was around 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, somewhere in there. That the source isn't quite clear how old he was. Um, but regardless, Babur had fell head over heels in love for this boy named Baburi. In fact, I've got a couple quotes here that I'm going to go through. Quote, there was a boy from the camp market named Baburi. Even his name was amazingly appropriate. I developed a strange inclination for him. Rather, I made myself miserable over him. Occasionally, Baburi came to me, but I was so bashful that I could not look him in the face, much less converse with him. In my excitement and agitation, I could not thank him for coming, much less complain of his leaving. Who could bear to demand the ceremonies of fealty? End quote. So in this quote, we kind of see his feelings for Baburi being set up. And something that I find interesting, really two things that I find interesting here, is first, that last line, who could bear to demand the ceremonies of fealty? Babur, at that time, was actually married. He had a wife. This wasn't uncommon for a king of, 16, 17 years old to be married at the time. But it does seem that at that time, Babur had fallen out of love with his wife. Originally, they were pretty in love, but as things went for Babur, he kind of fell out of love. So it's kind of interesting that he's lamenting the fact that he has to be, or he has to show fealty to his wife, right? But the next one that is a trend with the different quotes I'm going to bring up here is the fact that he's writing about this at all. I think in our modern world, we tend to have the idea that the ancient world was more conservative, more rigid, less flexible or understanding with things. But literally the emperor, literally the king of medieval India, was talking about how he loved a boy, how he was head over heels with a boy, you know, and I just find that so interesting. And I've got two more quotes here that I'm going to use to kind of just really show you how Babur felt about Baburi. Quote, may no one be so distraught and devastated by love as I. May no beloved so pitiless and careless as you. End quote. And then his next one, quote, "Nor power to go was mine, nor power to stay. I was just what you made me, O thief of my heart." End quote. That quote is the last time in the Baburnama that Babur talks about Baburi. I mean, that quote, like, to me is just so it's good. Like, "Oh, thief of my heart." Like, what a poet. By the way, the entirety of the Baburnama is written in couplet form, so like poetry, right? Anyways, um, but yeah, so it's clear that Babur was head over heels about Baburi, right? But one thing that we have to know is that we can't necessarily apply our modern day labels to Babur in this instance, right? Or really at all in regards to homosexuality, right? And that's kind of the thing I really want to dive into, right? But before I do that, I think you should love whoever you want to love. And just because our modern conventions of homosexuality don't, like, we can't put them on ancient people, it doesn't make it bad, right? Go be gay if that's your thing, right? Like, woohoo, yeah, woo. Like, who am I to, like, tell you, you have to love this person? Like, oh, I checked between their legs, you can't love them, right? Like, that's kind of a cock move, right? So not doing that. Anyways, but the moral of the story is that our modern convention of homosexuality did not exist back then, right? So you had, we'll just talk about Babur in specific. He died in 1530, right? So 1530, that puts us firmly in the medieval period, no matter where you are in the world, right? And people still liked people of their same gender, right? Or even people of what they would call a third gender back then. That's a topic for another video. I don't have time now, right? Um, but I think it's hard for us right here, right? To not put our labels on them, right? Because we could go back and we could see how Babur affectionately cared for and loved Baburi, right? And we would say, Babur is bisexual, at least, right? Or something to that effect. And we can't do that because the people of the time would not recognize it, right? And that's where it gets tricky, right? Because we want to say these things, we want to find these people who represent us back in history, but it's hard because, again, they would have no concept of that. But I think an interesting point is brought up there. In the year 1530, they had no concept of homosexuality, right? So let's play a little thought experiment. Do you think that they had a concept of homosexuality in the year zero or the year 2000 BC? Right? No, they didn't. Right? Homosexuality in our terms, like that exact word, first appeared. Homosexuality first appeared in the year 1869. I mean, nice, Hey, what a year, to choose that. But no, seriously, like people of the past did not have a concept of this, right? Um, there are varying different ideas of what loving someone of your same gender looked like. Very clearly, if we apply cultural relativism, let me crack out my armchair anthropology here. So, talking about a culture relative to its culture, its time and place. Um, in medieval India, clearly, if you were a 17-year-old boy and you were like, you fell in love with a 13-year-old boy, right? You're fine. Something to note on that too is like their relationship never became sexual, and Babur actually spent a pretty good portion of his reign trying to make sure that what we today would call pedophilia, I don't know if they even had a word for that back then, but they recognized that it was wrong too. Um, Babur spent a very large portion of his reign, like actually killing people who did that, right? So there's that for what it's worth. But in Babur's time, it was clear that in his case, that's fine, right? He wrote an autobiography that talked about it for pages, right? He literally talks about, and I don't have the quote pulled up me like right now, but he literally talks about how he would like go into love struck days around town and like write poetry and it wouldn't be good enough and he'd be flinging it around like it's just something out of a melodrama, and he's fine talking about it, right? So clearly what we would call homosexuality, what Babur would call just being in love, was perfectly acceptable in Babur's time and place. We can look at other societies too. Rome, for example, that one's classic. People have a lot of opinions on Rome, right? But in Rome, like specifically, when there's a guy and a guy in a relationship, one would typically take on the more feminine roles within the relationship, and people in Rome be like, "Oh my gosh, look, that dude's lost his manhood." Anyways, next topic, right? So like they recognized the relationship, and they didn't think negatively of it, right? They're like, "Oh, that dude's just not as manly now that he's taken on like the female role." But whatever, it's Rome. We don't care, right? And to go back even farther, right, as we're going back through time here, uh, ancient Greece, right? Pre-Rome, they had that. Look at like Alexander the Great, and I'm gonna mess this up. Hesphaestion. Ah, gosh, sorry. Yeah, my Greek isn't good. My apologies, right? Um, but look at that relationship, right? That's Alexander the Great. And I think it's worth noting, like, people like Alexander the Great, people like Babur are like not insignificant on the world stage, and they're perfectly fine talking about this stuff, right? And going back even farther than Alexander the Great, ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization here, literally the Fertile Crescent, the area between two rivers. If you don't know where that is, it's like between the Tigris and Euphrates River. So like think Iraq nowadays, right? Ish. So in Southwest Asia. But even then, I read up to half of the artwork that we found there depicts same sex relationships. And let's lowball this here. Let's say 1/4 of all artwork there depicts same sex relationships. That is a massive amount of artwork that's like depicting that, right? So I think what I have to say here, for kind of another part, is like people today, and I've heard this argument before, say that homosexuality is unnatural, right? And in a way, they're right, and in a way, they're wrong. They're right because our modern conception of homosexuality is new, all things considered, right? So we've had it since 1869. Nice, but that's new, right? 1869 is nothing. It's a blink of an eye in all of human civilization. I'm just talking about settled society here, right? Going back to Mesopotamia, people were probably loving people of their same gender even back when we were hunter gatherers, right? So it's been going on for a while, right? So all that to say is that our modern conception is new, but the act itself of a person of one gender falling in love and being in a relationship with a person of the same gender is not new. Though we do have to take care, like I've mentioned earlier, to not put our modern labels onto people who would have had no conception of that. And it's tricky. It really is. It really can be tricky. So if for whatever reason you don't necessarily support gay people in our society or being homosexual, right? I hope that you can look back at these 13 or so minutes that I've talked and find something in there that speaks to you. Because and I'm going to argue that homosexuality in our modern convention might be a new thing on the world stage, right? But a person loving a person of the same gender is not new in the slightest. It's actually quite normal, all things considered, throughout human history. So I leave that to you to form your own opinions, agree or disagree. But personally, I think it's perfectly fine if you love whoever you want to love, regardless of what's between their legs. That's that's none of my business, anyways. So I hope you enjoyed this Intellectual Tuesday. I know this isn't a topic that I normally talk about, but it's one that I'm passionate about nonetheless because go love whoever you want to love. Just be careful when we're putting labels on ancient things with modern day labels, right? And this doesn't just apply to homosexuality. It can apply to a wide range of topics and whatnot. But who cares? Who cares? Go love whoever you want to love and know that people have been loving whoever they want to love for a very long time. And nothing's going to change that. So until next Tuesday, I bid you farewell, and I hope that you have a beautiful and wonderful Intellectual Tuesday. Until then, take care. Bye bye.